there are so many things people are not doing in their lives. And see, the question pops up, why is my life not blessed? Right? We can speculate about that. We can guess and theorize. It's good to know the truth about what God requires of us. There are some requirements that many are not making in their lives, right? Wouldn't it be nice to know what those requirements are? And if you met those requirements, once you learn about the requirements, a true Christian is going to find them easy. Now, it is partly a transition because somehow people are going to have to get the residue of the world off of them. The world operates in a very specific way. It blinds a person to what it actually is and who's behind it. But to break that away from yourselves and to go into an actual different lifestyle can be challenging at best. But it's doable. You are, in fact, made to be able to perform everything of our Father. Do you know that? You are physically made and adapted to, and you've been given all qualifications and the green light to perform all that the Father has for you. But for the most part, many people do not meet the basic requirements. And they, in fact, reject them so long as they're dealing with the world because they accept the world's way. There are certain things in the world that are actually a rejection of God's word. So it's almost like we're trying to live our lives as a Christian, but we still have abominations attached to the way we do things. Thus, we cannot be blessed. And it's also good to know what the Father does not like, what he will not tolerate. There are some things he does not like. Let me ask one question. I'm going to see the answer. The answer, by the way, is in the Bible. You ready? Did Israel, when they were being freed from Egypt, did they see God? No, I got a better question. Did Moses see God? Yes or no? If you think Moses saw God, then say yes or no. Now, that seems to be like one of those, what kind of question is that? One of the things, right? It's a very important one. It's very important that we all understand what was taking place back then. Now, what did Jesus, some people say no, some people say yes. Let me remind you what Jesus said. Jesus said this, no man hath seen God at any time. Was he lying? That's what Jesus said. No man has seen God at any time. Was he lying? Anybody? Was he lying? Here it is. Nobody did see God. Moses did not see God. What did Moses behold? What did he behold? You ready? He only beheld the presence. That's all. That's what he saw, was the presence, not God. He saw the presence of the Lord, not God. To see the presence is to see the atmosphere surrounding God. God is not a man that he would have a backside anyway. And that when he said, they said, well, Moses said, no, I don't want to die. So God said, I'm going to show you my backside. If you read that carefully, you need to, it's time now to understand who was talking. Because when a lot of people read Deuteronomy, right, and they hear the term God mentioned over and over and over and over again, they assume that God did it himself or that something was God. But if you read carefully, you'll notice God telling Moses what he saw. God told Moses what he saw. Isn't that interesting? He told Moses what he saw. He told Joshua some things, right? But he does so in a very specific way. Nobody has beheld the Lord. Not God the Father. Keep in mind the prophets used to call angels Lord. An angel of the Lord. Many did see, and many were in the company of, and even that would cause death. The people of Israel heard the voice of the Lord, and they could not take it anymore. Because when God speaks, listen, when we speak, they're just words, right? They're just words. But there's something right? There's something about God's voice that's very different from ours, and the people couldn't take that. If God speaks, it changes reality. He didn't speak like us, just to utter a word. No, when he speaks, all things comply. Everything complies. God's speech is not like ours. So they couldn't suffer to hear his speech anymore because it penetrated the body, soul, and everything else. And it changed reality as he spoke. They couldn't do it anymore. Did Enoch see God? No, it writes Enoch walked with God. And that term walk with God means he spent time. He spent time with the Godhead, right? That's what it means. He spent time with the Godhead. Okay? That's what that means. See, these simple terms, oh boy, this study is going to be pretty good. I actually began this as an actual study too. I began this study on a whiteboard, a big whiteboard, right? Because when I was learning certain things in the Bible, having dealt with people have certain ways and conditions set within themselves, and they know certain things. And for the most part, sometimes they operate in a very weird way. And then when you start learning about the Bible, people speak things in so many different ways that often the real word is lost, and people begin to operate by hearsays. In other words, the word is converted just a little bit, enough to cause someone not to understand what's being said. So what I did was I did a study to put that back in its perspective. It's very easy. Once you see it, you'll see it. Oh, there it is, right? It's kind of like somebody clarifying a sentence. You still read the sentence, but now that you see it for yourselves, you understand it. And this is what is so good about context. If you take things out of context, your mind's going to be all over the place. You can fill in the blanks. Well, guess what? I am scared to fill in the blanks with the living God. I don't know about you, but I am. I have a great fear of the Lord, which means a great respect. Plus, it breaks me. And it breaks me. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and confess this. When I read the book of Deuteronomy, it brings me to tears all the time. Do you know why? Because you can see God's love. One can actually capture what God was doing. And you know what he said? He said one statement. He said, oh, if they would just hear me. If they would just hear me and keep my words. But that statement, oh, before it, is almost like an emotional plea. Because God desires, it's almost like he desperately desires to bless you. I mean, desperately desires to bless you, right? But God will not bless anything that is outside, that is not his, that will not acknowledge him in all of its ways. But I do know that God desperately wanted to bless his people. And he said, you know, if you can keep my words, you're going to be blessed. You won't have to borrow from anybody. You will subdue the world. I'll put everybody will fear you. They won't fight you. You will make the decisions in the earth because you keep my ways that are upright. And through you, this entire earth will be subdued. That's what God said in Deuteronomy. But he also said, he said, but if you don't, if you remain, and he said they were stiff-necked, and he said something. He said, because you're stiff-necked, in time, you're going to drift away. Because you're stiff-necked. Because you will not keep it. Because you're stubborn and you won't listen. Because you're not capturing everything, because you're trying to hear it your way and not the way I'm saying it. You're going to forget my ways. You're going to defile yourselves, and I cannot have a defiling element in direct representation of me. Because he made a plea, oh, if you would keep my ways. But in the book of Deuteronomy, it was spoken in such a way that even right now, Jesus amplified, he emphasized the love of God, but often we don't understand the love of God. We don't understand it. For example, God said to them that if they would employ his ways, in that same moment, if they had corrupted themselves but came back in the same moment, God loves them so much, he would reverse everything. He said, because if you listen and uphold his ways, you're under a blessing. But if you don't listen, you're under a curse that's already there. A curse is when you reap darkness and death and all things upon everything you do. A blessing is when everything you do prospers. Everything you set your hands to, everything you set your mind to, everything. But they wouldn't keep it. Moses said the same thing. Joshua said the same thing. You guys will not keep it. You won't keep it. You won't keep his ways. You're going to you keep drifting. You have a rebellious element that you love. And you won't keep his ways. And then they were blessed for so long. They had freedom for so long. They began to abuse it. They began not to listen to the Lord. They did not, because God, through the promise of Abraham, he gave a portion or a lot of different kingdoms and places in accordance to how he said he would give them to the tribes of Israel, even to the half tribe. Right? There's a half tribe out there, even to that one. He said he was going to give, but they would not keep his ways. He said that every so often, and he gave a time for this, that everybody in Israel was to be gathered together. Right? That the appointed person would read the words that God gave them to remind them he delivered them out of bondage. But he set them free, to remind everybody, to teach their children of the same thing, that it was God that set you free. And he said to do this, he said to do that often, to gather everybody, and everybody was to come, so that the children who don't know the story would know the story. And then I look at my own life, and it kind of breaks you, because you don't instantly tell your children that story. And it breaks me, because who is out there teaching? And they're not giving us. I didn't learn this from anybody. I had to go read it. I had to go study. I had to go persevere. They don't teach this stuff, right? They didn't teach. These are basics. But because they don't teach it, it's not passed down, and things are getting corrupted more and more. When I was growing up, there was natural fear of the Lord in me, but as a way of a kid, you don't know the story. You don't know that you're alive right now because God delivered you. You don't know that. People don't even know why Jews are God's chosen people. They don't know why. I hear all sorts of stories on the web. It's because of blood. It's because of this. Wrong. Because a Jew is something God named them, not what a person names themselves. God picked up some people from anywhere, cleaned them up, and made them his people. He took the throwaways of the bunch and made it his people. He cleaned them up. Yet, they don't teach that, do they? Why do you think Jesus said, you're not a Jew because of your blood? You're not a Jew because you're a Jew outwardly. Right? Meaning you're not one of God's people because you are genetically one of God's people. That doesn't make you God's people. The adoption process, they didn't even tell anybody this. They don't teach it. Why? Because they're stubborn with theologies and all this stuff that confuses people. And people don't have a clear story on it because everybody's theorizing. I don't know about you. I don't do the theory thing. Because it's empty food. It's like eating a hollow steak. There's no sustenance in it. There's nothing in it but a shell. Looks like food, smells like food, tastes like food. Zero nourishment. So we're going to dive well, I shouldn't say deep, but in a consistent study for all of us, so that we can have that word. My goodness, it will touch your life. It will really touch your life to know certain things. There's so many things we don't know because they're not teaching, because they get stuck in certain areas. They won't go to the rest because the rest does not justify what they're trying to do today. We need correction. We need a standard and a reason to persevere, a truthful reason. Do you not know that you cannot continue to do something out of foolishness? You have to have a solid reason, and that's why most people, they start changing course. Because you're made to have a godly reason to do what you do. All of us are fighting elements of flesh we don't even understand, and we don't know how to conquer it. We're trying to incorporate that. We're trying to utilize. See, the world has taught us so many things and then passed out from generation to generation. We're caught in our own story, still trying to make a name for ourselves. This is the ideology within us, and they suffered from that same thing. God said, you never have to do that. I will announce you to the world. My works will be in you. I will show up for you if you keep my sayings. And you know what his sayings, if you go through and you read what the Lord desired of us, he would say, my goodness, who couldn't do this? What is wrong with us? But teaching is important. When you're a child and people don't teach their children these things, it's almost like a resistive element within parents saying, well, I can't teach my kids this now. I'll have to do it later. It's always this do it later thing in us, right? We don't know what that is. I mean, the Bible clarifies it. But we need the real story. Aren't you tired of walking around? You've read the Bible, but there's no strength in you. There's no power. There's no real power. We run around declaring things, don't we? When God clearly said he would do those things for us. We take them, we're trying to survive by utilizing bits and pieces of the Word. But see, we need to be brought up in the Word. There's a difference in being brought up in the Word and then grabbing pieces of it, trying to utilize it in your life and get everything wrong. Once we have that foundation again, I'm telling you, everything else is clarified. You won't even have the questions that you have. But you will begin to recognize. And see, that's when you call out your brother and your sister. That's when folks are open. I tell you, because a point will come when not one person here will be ashamed to admit any sin. Nor will they be ashamed to admit anything they're doing at the present moment. It'll be open, and you won't have to worry about somebody else scoffing you, because scoffing will have no power in you. To stand in truth could be a little different than what you think. As a result of not having that foundation, we have been operating by a power. And I can tell you right now, it's not all God's power. Nope. We have been reading his word, trying to escape something. We have an escape mentality. That's the first thing that should be corrected in this study. We need not escape anything, but sometimes, because of the language used in the latter half of the story, we can believe it to be one thing, but in truth it's not. We lock on to terms like that, and we start to develop emotions around it. In the Bible, it says that if you're caught in sin, right? If you're in a sinful life, God will make a way of escape. That doesn't mean, listen, a way of escape simply means an exit. A way to not do the sin anymore. A way to get out of the entire situation. A way to step out of death back into life. See how different that sounds? But if you just say a way of escape, everybody thinks, oh, get your bags and run like a chicken. That's not what it means. A way of escape means an exit. God will give you a door that you may open up and exit all that sin, that you may be in life again. See how different that sounds? But if you have an escapist mentality, which many people do because they are bombarded by fear, and they don't know why. But you're going to learn why. And I can almost tell you're not going to have fear that way anymore. If you have fear, it's going to be for the Most High. Listen, let me share this with you. When you actually, if you guys were to see, right? Let me do it this way. Many of you, when you were young, you were scared of something, right? Could have been anything. You were scared of something. But then something else, much bigger than what you were afraid of, you encountered, and you forgot about the little thing you were frightened of. See, when a big thing shows up, suppose a bumblebee comes out. You know how we swat bumblebees? You don't want to get stung. That's what everybody thinks. I'm going to get stung. So they start swatting them. It makes you a little nervous. You don't want to be hovering around you, right? Because they can sting. Anyway, you start swatting. But then if somebody starts shooting a weapon, you're going to forget about that bee, won't you? All of a sudden, you have no more fear of the bee. Why? Because a greater fear element has come. A greater thing has come. Right? Now, follow me on this. So, in comparison to the bumblebee, that's nothing compared to somebody running around who's shooting at everybody. Right? That would just scare anybody. Correct? Do you guys understand that? Well, let me share this with you. We have fears of this world. When you start thinking of the Father the way he really is, there's no way you're going to have fear of the things in this world. There's no way. There's no way. When we begin to see, not behold or not place our eyes on him, but when we begin to see, internally see the Father for who he is, your fear is going to leave. It's going to leave. Why is that? Because the same way a person shooting a weapon all around your neighborhood is going to make you forget about that little bumblebee. It's the same way thinking of God Almighty will consume. It's so much bigger than anything you know that it's impossible to have fear of anything else. It would be like a young girl. She goes to school. She's bullied every single day, and she's scared of the bullies. So one day, her daddy, who's 600 feet tall, follows her to school. She's no bigger than his pinky toe, right? He goes to school with her. She's not going to have fear that day. Why? Because of her daddy. That's why. In fact, she'll do even better. Those same bullies that used to beat her up, she's going to say, oh, you're going to get hurt bad if you do that. Please don't do that. In fact, she'll likely suffer all of what they can issue out because she didn't want them to die from the Father. Imagine that. Imagine if you bodyguards walked around you all the time and they were told to shoot anybody who attempts to touch you, right? And suppose nobody could see them but you, right? Nobody could see them but you. They're loaded. They're locked and loaded. Say you had 100 of them walking around you all the time. And then somebody comes up and they rob you. Now, you know what's going to happen to the person. So immediately, because you know what's going to happen to the person, you know they're going to be shot dead. You say, hey, you don't have to live your life that way. Keep the wallet, but listen to me. Don't steal. Don't do that. Don't do that. You'd plead with the person to change their ways. They just stole from you. You wouldn't do like you normally do. No, you start to plead for them. Why? Because you know they could die right there on their feet. That will be their last moment. See, when you have something huge on your side, you don't fear anything. What you do is you become very heartfelt concerning everything because you know that if anybody wrongs you, they could die for it. When you know who the Father, when you can see the Father, not with your eyes, but internally see the Father for who he is, you will have no more fear. None. When you understand how much he loves you, and one of the missing components in many people's lives is they don't comprehend how much God loves them. And you cannot comprehend that without knowing a history of how the Lord interacted with humanity and what he did and what he did not do. You have to know those things. Because I tell you, if beginning in Deuteronomy, it will break you down to tears. I'm telling you. I know it gets me every time. It gets me every time. Every single time. Because you begin to see the persona of the Father. You know, it's kind of not to make him into a person, right? Not like us, but you begin to see who he is. You hear him talk. You start to understand what he desires of us. Why he made us. What he's doing already. You'd be shocked to know what the Lord has done in your life. What he's already done in your life. With what he's already done in your life. And you can know that. That would change your life forever. But if you're beguiled, which many people are because they're under a different type of spiritual leadership, you know this through arguments, through internal fights and uproars and things that shouldn't be there. All of us understand that these emotional sets that people so vigorously defend, they shouldn't be there. They should have no power over us. How many of you get sent into chaos when you get angry? You do, let's face it. We do. But we get angry because of a loss of control. Because we believe that something shouldn't be. When in fact, nothing can just happen by itself. We can't see the whole story. It's frustration. We get frightened because we think things are going to do the unimaginable. In other words, our fear is born of imagination, not reality. So it's more of a suggestion of what something can do that causes us great fear. How many times you watch a scary movie and you were frightened? Nothing touched you. Nothing changed in your house. But you perceived as something in a specific way and your imagination ran wild. You became scared. That really happens. But we don't have to live in a world of imagination, a world of fantasy. I think it's past the time for people to start living in reality. And when I say reality, I'm not talking about how you've been living. No. The real reality. The Lord made a promise. See, there are promises upon your life too you don't even know about. Nobody taught these things. There are certain things you cannot get rid of in your life because God already said he would do it, not you. There are certain things man cannot do for himself, but we don't know it because nobody taught this. And so what we're going to do here at COT, I mean, really get that foundational teaching going. Now, I can already tell you, of course, it's going to be fought and combated, but it's going to be black and white in context, nothing out of context. It's not going to be any of those, well, I thought this was that, and I think this has to do with that. No, we're not going that route. It'll be simple to the point. It is packed with good things. Most importantly, the truth. The study itself will break chains off your life. Kind of like some of you, if you applied what we were talking about the other day, just stop waking up to see what you can do for yourself, having ideas for yourself, but wake up and start working for other folks. Look at your kids and say, I'm going to feed you today. Right? Let your motivation change. Let it be different from consuming it all upon yourselves, but to wake up and begin to commit things to others. Whoever applied that, their life is changing. Joy returns again. It is always a joy to work for somebody else, to do something for somebody else. It's kind of like Christmas time, right? During Christmas, people get excited because they have a great gift to wrap for somebody else. They do. But you don't get excited if you have a gift to wrap for yourself. You do when you have something to give to somebody else, and I'm telling you something. You have something called a life. You have a life. Your life is a gift for somebody else. Do you know this? A lot of people don't. And it's in the Old Testament. Oh my, when that breaks out, you're going to really know it. See, some things you cannot believe, and you will not believe until you hear the Father say it. Do you know that? And when you hear the Father decree it, it makes it real. It changes everything. If you're like I am, nothing is real unless you hear your Father say it. I can look at something right in front of my face, and I'm telling you, I will discard it unless the Father has said it. I'm just telling you that now. It doesn't matter what I see, what will manifest, unless God said it. It's just not going to be real to me. So I'm one of those people, even if I see it, I still won't believe it. But if the Father decreed it, then I'll follow it, and I'll never dispute it. I do not. There's nothing in me that desires to dispute anything God ever said. You know why? Because all of it rings incredibly true. And do you know what? That's something we don't think about enough either. I wonder why nobody really thinks of. Why is it that when you can read lots of reports and information and everything, but when you hear the words of your Father, it is law in your soul. People should jump up and down just because of that fact. That's incredible. Of all of what you read, it's when you read the Bible, when you hear the words of the Lord. That's when you bind it, it becomes law. It's a deep confirmation within you. That is supernatural. That's not natural. That's supernatural. But we're going to go over that. There are some do's and don'ts. There's some abominations that this world has to get rid of. God even said some very harsh things about the times we live in right now. He spoke as to why the Antichrist rises. He told us why the Antichrist rises. He said this in the Old Testament. You know, you hear a lot of teachings about the Antichrist is coming, but you never hear why he has to come or why he's coming in the first place. Sure enough, the Lord tells us why he's coming in the first place. Why that will never be erased or removed. And then when you learn about that, it hits you to your heart again. Most people, they hear the Antichrist, they get scared. When we start to study and you read certain things, you're going to cry. Your heart's going to bleed thanks. You're not going to believe the kindness of the Lord. You're not going to believe it. Number one, you're going to begin to see yourself in a true potential. You're going to see everything in your life. You're going to be deep contrasts between you and the Lord. You're going to see the truth. And what's the Bible say? What did Jesus say? He said, if you continue in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Freedom comes when you have the truth. To have a truth is not simply to know that the Father's good. No. To know that your Father's good is to know what he has done in all circumstances. That's when you say, my Father is good, and you're just reading, you're just stating it because you read it somewhere, there's no connection with it. When you know the stories, when you see what he has done, when you see what he did not do, then you'll say, no, my Father is good. You remember Jesus when they said, somebody said, oh, good teacher. He said, the Father is good. He stopped him. He said, the Father is good. when you know the stories, when you see what he did, that's when your life changes. That's when a fire really begins that nobody can ever put out. That's when your life, you make one of those life commitments, not by your mouth, because you will have read something else about making decrees. But in your soul of souls, you'll truly seek the will of God, and you'll do so without tiring. You won't tire of it. You will never get weary with it. There's a reason people get weary with things of the word, and it was named by God himself. God told us why we would get weary. He answered all these questions. But you know what happened? Nobody armed us when we were growing up. Hardly anybody armed us. I think that, for the most, it's my opinion. But many of God's children at that time, they were distracted by the newness of things that man was creating. And in that moment, they began to worship man. They began to do everything they could to empower themselves. In fact, that's when all the motivational speakers came. You remember that? See, if you operate by truth, you don't need a motivational speaker. When you have the Word of God, you do not need a motivational speaker. But during that time when we spoiled ourselves and we were worshiping man, worshiping gadgets and toys like nowadays, right? If a new iPhone comes out, everybody runs to it. If there's a presidential election, everybody gets involved. It pulls out our souls, and we're not thinking right. Don't let it pull you in the soul, because it will pull you into it. Don't partake of the violence. You guys remember that statement? Please don't partake of the violence. I'll tell you why now. When you're back in your rightful position, your eyes will not be shut. That means you may know a thing that the Lord will do, but you will not say a thing. You'll know the presence of the Lord, but you will not sit up and talk about it all day. What you will do is focus on those around you, understanding they're in a very vulnerable position. Even knowing the movements of the adversary, you'll intercede in many different ways. And your tasks will begin. In summary, we've lived our lives under a social experiment. And that's what we truly know as the social experiment. And believe me, it's an experiment. We're just now realizing that it provides us no sustenance. It's not food for us. It does not last. You ever hear somebody say, I need a good meal that will last all day? You ever hear that? Not a sandwich. No noodles. I mean, a good meal that will last all day. I need to be fueled all day. So they eat something heavy. Well, that's the Father's word. And what we've been eating are chips. Things that satisfy us, but also degrade us at the same time. We get the benefit of chewing the food, swallowing the food, tasting the food, but no nourishment. Why? Because somehow somebody before us was distracted. Why do you think so many of us are hungry? So hungry. Lord knows I have a hunger that only the Word can satisfy. And is fully satisfied by doing the will of the Father, which are the words of Christ. But it's time that all of us know that. I tell you, it's almost like people are keeping secrets about the Word too. Simple, small things that can free a person. They will not enter into those subjects. And Satan has set an offense before everything so that nobody talks about anything. Well, that may be offensive. Well, that will offend. So I'll tell you right now, everybody, I'll tell you out there, I love my Father in heaven. I trust his word. When he names abominations, when he names blessed things, I believe in them wholeheartedly. I believe we are the ones who have lost our minds, who have played around in life, and through rebellion have tried to form an identity. But I also have a hope in anyone who has been living in high rebellion. I don't judge, because it's your life and your death, so I'm not going to judge. I will encourage. But I can tell you right now, when the Lord said certain permanent things, like put an end to certain things and this, that, and the other, I'll be careful to do them. Hope you guys understand that. The word of the Lord is more than just mere writing. It is life. It is good food. Good food.